get started, I'm glad to announce that we have Vinod here to talk about information-theoretic cryptography. He came all the way from MIT to talk to us. And as a short announcement, he's also going to give a talk tomorrow at 4 at Salam, if I recall correctly. But there you have it.
I have a challenge for you. Say his full name.
That's not fair.
It's actually pretty easy, easier than you imagine. It's divide and conquer. It's really, really good. So great to be here. Someone told me that the greatest test of a speaker is to grab the attention, to keep the attention of a 5-year-old. So let's see the precious acting. 5, 6, 8. 8. Wow, that's easy. So great to be here. I'd like to tell you about a sequence of recent results in a problem called secret sharing, and more broadly, the work is about sort of problems in information, in the intersection of information theory and cryptography. Okay, so let's get started with this timeless quote. Appeared in a paper of Joe Killian, it's attributed to Silvio Ricciardi, that says cryptographers seldom sleep well, and look, for a good reason. Much of what we do is, all the towers, buildings we build, all the sort of fantastic cryptographic primitives, most of them are only good against computationally bounded adversaries, assuming that your attackers are polynomial time bounded, typically. And on top of that, you want, for these things to work, you want certain problems, computational problems, to be hard against polynomial time algorithms. Typically factoring, discrete logarithms, they're not even sort of NP-complete problems, right? They're actually like very specific problems in NP that you assume is hard. So no wonder that we are such nervous wrecks. This talk is about how to get us some sleep, and it's about information-theoretic crypto, by which I mean sort of cryptography that gives us unconditional security, and even better, cryptography that is sort of secure, even if your attackers are computationally unbound. So we're going to make no computational hardness assumptions. Indeed, we can't, because attackers are unbounded. Right? And the question is, what can we do against such powerful adversaries? There's a lot. In fact, if you go back all the way to kind of the beginning, in some sense, of modern cryptography, there's a basic problem of secure communication, right? So I have a message that I want to send to Brian, and there are people, so all you guys sitting around eavesdropping on the channel. So how do I do it? Well, that's the problem of secure communication. It started, in the work of Shannon, from the late 40s, and so Shannon showed how to sort of optimally, solve this problem against computationally unbounded attackers, and this is really one-time pass. Right? This work kind of, at least sort of inspired, Shannon's work on information theory. So secure communication, sort of against unbounded adversaries, you sort of understand. I mean, one-time pass is actually the optimal thing you can do. There's still work on sort of other models of sort of channels, where noisy channels and so on and so forth, but really the fundamental problem, Shannon introduced it, is solved. Today is about secure computation, which is really not one problem. It's a collection of problems, and it's a much richer kind of framework of questions, and consequently much less well understood. I'll tell you what this sort of area is in a second, and in particular I'll focus on sort of two of the problems that come up in sort of information-theoretic secure computation. The secret sharing problem and the private information retrieval problem, which for coding theorists you might know of it as locally decodable. So problem of constructing locally decodable codes, they're really sort of one and the same question. So one more thing that I did not sort of put in the slide is yet another sort of thing that happened in information-theoretic crypto that profoundly influenced theoretical computer science. And this is, it started with the work of Shafi and others that asked the question of, can you do sort of interactive proofs, which are also zero knowledge, without any computational assumptions? So we knew from the 1980s, mid-1980s, that you could achieve zero knowledge, assuming computational assumptions, one-way functions was good enough. But she was interested in, so she and others were interested in the question, can you do this without any assumptions? And to do that, she introduced a slightly different model of zero knowledge, where you had not one prover, but in tractor proofs, where you have one prover, you have two provers, and the provers couldn't talk to each other. This is the multi-prover and tractor proofs that we know. And that really sort of led us to where we are with PCBs and some of the. So the study of sort of information-theoretic crypto seems to have paid dividends twice before, and hopefully the goodies will keep coming. Okay, good. So the focus today is on two specific problems. One is secret sharing. Let me start defining what that is right away. So here's the question. There is this big guy called the dealer. He has one bit, a secret, that he wants to sort of distribute across n parties, n is 5. And his goal is to sort of give each party a share, a string, S1 up to S5, in a way that any authorized subset of parties, we have to define what authorized means, but once you sort of say, well, this, you're good, you're good, you're good, you're good, right, for subsets, you want to make sure that any authorized subset can recover the secret, the bit, putting together the information. But no other subset, any unauthorized subset, has no information about this bit. So
Except those that contain an authorized subset.
Second, excellent. Any set that contains an authorized set should also be authorized, obviously, right? So this collection of sets has to be monotone, right? If a set is in the collection, any superset is also in the collection. Thanks. Thank you very much. So 2 bullets from now. Good. So this is a collection of sets, right? I mean, this is what you want. Good. This is a problem that Adi and Ishmael and they introduced back in the 70s. And in their formulation of the problem, a set is authorized if the number of players in the set is at least t. T is a number smaller than t. Right? So it's a natural way of defining this. It's a natural kind of collection of subsets. One could, of course, define this much more generally, right? So any sort of monotone, right, Boolean function defines a collection of authorized subsets. That encodes this. If a subset is, it's authorized, any sort of superset is also authorized. And this is what we'll talk about. The general sort of notions of what we'll talk about. Okay, so just sort of notation. So subsets of n players, I'll sort of use either the subsets or characteristic vectors back and forth. I mean, they're really the same thing, right? I mean, P1, P3 is 1 and 1. This is the characteristic vector of the subset. A collection of subsets of players is a Boolean function, right? That's that. An access structure is a monotone collection of subsets is a monotone Boolean function. So I'll keep going back and forth between these. Good. So really, the key measure of goodness of a secret sharing scheme is the total size of all the shares, the number of bits in together of all the shares. Good, so let's kind of warm up, right? I mean, how would you possibly, so what is the kind of first secret sharing scheme that comes to mind? Let's say, the access structure for a moment is saying, well, if all of the guys come together, they should be able to recover, otherwise nothing, right? This is a very simple access structure, right? How would you do secret sharing for it? Well, let me kind of start off, right? I have a bit, I pick sort of 5 bits, n bits, which are random, subject to the sum of these bits being b. Right, so if you look at any n-1 collection of subsets, you get nothing. If you all of them come together, you get this. Yeah, so that's how you do it. So can we bootstrap on this and do secret sharing for general access structures? You can, right? I mean, anyone wants to take a shot? I'm sure the 8-year-old can solve it faster than I can say a secret sharing. Yeah, I failed as a speaker, Yeah, so how would you do secret sharing? I'm just giving you an access structure, it's a collection of subsets, minimal subsets, let's say. How would you secret share for this? Here's what I would do. I would take each subset, right? I know that if these guys come together, they should be able to recover a secret. So I can additively secret share the secret among this subset. Well, fine for this subset. How about another subset? Do it again, independently if I could. and keep going for each subset. All right. This is one way of doing it. Except the number of subsets could actually be pretty large. Even for very simple access structures. Think about the threshold access structure where you want more than one or two people to come together. For instance, how many sets are there? Then choose n over 2. So it's pretty large. So even for simple kind of access structures, this process is not the most, yeah, that's the first thing you think of, but not by far, but not the least. Right? Does that make sense so far? And again, if I didn't say it explicitly, do it now. Just interrupt me anytime. I don't care about getting to the end of the talk. I care about non-zero information transfer. Yeah. Good. So it turns out you can do better than this sort of neither way, right? And that was this result of a Ben and Lone Leiter from again back in the 80s, the good old 80s. Everything happened. And they said the following, that if this access structure, or rather this Boolean function, which sort of recognizes that structure, this monotone Boolean function, if it can be computed by a small monotone formula, then you can do secret sharing pretty well. In particular, the size of the shares is proportional to the size of the monotone. So that's there. That's the scheme of the constructive set. Not, again, maybe not 8-year-old, but a 12-year-old can come up with it.
But there's an easy solution if you have a certain cardinality bound. Every set with more than
Absolutely.
3 things is
Absolutely.
good.
And just 3, right?
But that's hard to write Boolean, isn't it? As a function, isn't that like a large formula?
No. Threshold can be computed by a small, right? I mean, yeah, I mean, I suppose it's non-trivial, right? Boolean's sort of construction of a monotone formulas for majority can be adapted to sort of thresholds. Yeah, can do
Maybe
it.
in case it's just a sufficient, so you can probably do much better than even the Boolean formulas. That's it.
Yeah.
Actually,
Here,
that's my hope.
Here n is the number of parties.
N is the number of parties. Indeed. So Venkat, that's actually the hope. I'd love to see this, but this actually is more or less the best known for general functions, for general.
Well, that's right, but we don't know lower bound that this is the best. That's what I think.
Absolutely. Okay, so you guys are like way ahead. So let me go. Okay. Okay. So monotone Boolean functions are not the end of the world. You can define this thing called span programs. Actually, monotone span programs. Karchner and Wigderson showed that any monotone span program gives you a linear secret sharing scheme. Actually, the other way around as well. A secret sharing scheme the other way around. And again, the best known monotone span program for a general monotone function has size 2 to the n. And the lower bound is more or less close. It's 2 to the n over 2. Right. So you know, these guys don't do any good for the worst access function. Yes.
This results, if I understand correctly, are for the case where the secret is 1 bit.
Yes.
If I have like a k-bit secret, do I have to multiply this by k, or is there
That's a
something-
great question. This is the amortization question, right? Sometimes you don't have to, and again, this is not a question that people asked very much before 2014. I mean, so the only non-trivial result I know for positive result for amortization happened like last year. So it's a great question, but again, largely open. I'm just going to talk about sort of the not the many bit secret cases of 1 bit. So far. All right. So really, if you look at it, this should bother you tremendously, right? I mean, what the state of affairs suggests is that the communication complexity, right, which is the total share size, is a measure of communication, seems to depend on the computational complexity of a certain object that you're trying to compute. Right? In this case, the complexity of the access function, right? The monotone Boolean formula size or span programs. So at the very first sight, this should bother you. Then think about it a little bit more. It should maybe not bother you because we know relations between communication complexity and formula size. Karchner-Wigderson, I guess, right? I mean, the Karchner-Wigderson games is a connection between sort of the amount complexity computing a function versus the formula size. So you know, it should bother you, but maybe not all that much. Yeah. Still, this is an open question. Can you do any better than those trivial sort of 2 to the n terms or the worst functions?
So again, n was the number of parties, right?
Correct. Yes.
So how does your formula does not depend on the computational cost? It only depends on the number of parties, right?
Well, so by computational cost, I mean the cost of sort of, what is the formula I'm talking about? It's a formula that takes a subset of players as input and tells you whether it's a good subset or a bad subset. So it's a formula that decides the access structure, right? So it seems that the total share size in the secret sharing scheme is proportional to the size of this formula. Why should that be the case? I mean, if you look at the construction, you see where this is coming from, but really, yeah, no good reason. In fact, the lower bounds are, this is the best lower bound we know. 2 to the n is the upper bound, remember, and n squared is the best lower bound. So you could think, look, I mean, come on, like we know these kind of things happening in computational complexity, in circuit complexity, right? I mean, this is the kind of gap we have. But actually, not often I say this, that we should be even more ashamed than complexity theorists because we don't know better lower bounds, even existentially. Right? So in circuit complexity, we know, of course, that there exist functions which require large circuits to compute, right? Shannon, counting argument for the math, right? Here, I don't even know how to show that there exists an access structure, Boolean function, for which the secret sharing scheme takes more than n squared. If you do the obvious counting, it fails completely. So we should, in some sense, we are in a worse shape than computational complexity. Okay, so let me skip this. So even if you sort of restrict the type of secret sharing scheme in the hope of proving better load bounds, we still don't know kind of tight results in this space. We know something better than obvious. So we know omega 2 to the n over 2 bound as opposed to omega squared, which is considerable progress, but it's still not the same as the upper bound, which is 2. Okay, so we know considerable amount, but not the full story. Okay, so the question is, what's the right answer? And even more than that, I'm interested in the question of, does the right answer tell us something about sort of other things in theoretical computer science? Just like sort of proofs and communication told us about PCPs and information theory, does it teach us something? So this is our result. There's a reason why this is a theory talk. So we show that for every access structure, for the worst access structures, there is a secret sharing scheme where the total share size is better than 2. How much better? It's 2 to the power 0.994 times n. Usually in a theory talk, 0.994 is a proxy for 1 minus epsilon, right? And then 1 minus epsilon for arbitrarily small epsilon. No, this is really 0.994. So maybe in retrospect, I shouldn't have called this, breaking the circuit size or formula size barrier. This is a crack in the circuit size formula size barrier, but hopefully a crack that widens as we keep thinking about it.
Is this linear?
No, so this one is not linear, but we have a linear, okay, so maybe I'll jump ahead. So we have a linear secret sharing scheme which also does better than 2 to the n, and the complexity, the communication size complexity there is 2 to the 0.999 times n, and that really is 0.999, doesn't kind of trail off, right? And coincidentally, so we know by Kashmer and Victorson that monotone span program size is tightly related to the shear complexity of linear secret sharing schemes. So that tells us that every monotone Boolean function has a monotone span program of size 2 to the 0.9 times n. The best we knew was 2 to the n. So it does teach us something new about computational complexity. Yeah. Right. So I, when sort of my co-authors gave this talk, I sit in this talk and they present this result. I keep thinking to myself, like, why don't they tell me where this 0.994 comes in? I keep thinking throughout the talk, and at the end of the talk, I'm so confused myself. So let me sort of tell you where that comes from. This is really sort of jumping ahead, and the reason I'm doing it is to suggest a problem for you guys to think about, to help me out in circuit complexity. Right? So if there is a problem in circuit complexity that we solve, we get this 2 to the 0.994n number. If you solve it better, you get a better signature. Okay, so it's yet another sort of relation to computational complexity. Okay, so what is the problem? Here's the problem. You have a monotone Boolean function on n inputs. And let's say I want you to design a circuit with and OR gates that computes this function. Okay, so how large does this, in the worst case, how large does the circuit have to be? I mean, you can do the counting and you'll get to the end. Because there are essentially 2 to the n monotone Boolean functions. Shannon type counting will tell you 2 to the n. Let me change the problem on you a little bit. Let me now change the atoms of the circuit, right? So the atoms used to be and OR gates. Now I'm going to give you many more atoms. In particular, I'll give you all slice functions. What do I mean by slice function? This is what I mean. Okay, a slice function is something that is 0 for all inputs of a Hamming weight less than some number, 1 for all inputs bigger than this Hamming weight, and in between can be arbitrary. So there are really a ton of slice functions, right? T-slice functions, there are 2 to the n choose t of them, right? That's a lot. I mean, if I give you n over 2 slice functions, it's 2 to the n choose n over 2, which is roughly 2 to the n, right? I'm giving you a lot of freedom for the construction. These are your atoms. Now can you go construct a monotone Boolean formula for any monotone circuit as small as possible?
So in particular, if the Hamming weight is exactly t, then can be.
I am done. So in particular, if your access structure, right, it always accepts sets of size more than t, like any, set of people of size more than t, get the secret. Any set less than t, do not get the secret. In between, interesting stuff happens. Let's say that is access structure, we can do much better than 2 to the 0.994. In fact, we can do 2 to the square root n. Okay.
So your slice function required to be monotone?
Yes, the slice
That's
function.
not in the definition.
Yeah, it should be.
Right?
It should be. It should. Yeah.
No, but it follows from the definition. Like, it has to be more. Because it's only one element.
Yeah.
But it could be exactly so many things. Oh, I see what you're saying if you get it.
Yeah, I guess it does. Right. So if you can design a small monotone formula over this basis, you're good. Our answer to this question is 2 to the 0.994n, and really the question is that's where the 0.994 comes.
Just make sure they can have like arbitrary span in these functions.
These functions, I mean, they take sort of n bits of input and they compute this some slice function, right?
Exactly.
Exactly. So each gate takes n bits of input and the fan-in, it has to be a formula. So it has to, it's not fan-in, it's fan-out, right? I mean, the fan-out of the circuit has to be 1. So it has to be a formula. That's that. Yeah, or fan-in 2 and fan-in 2 and slice function fan-in n.
So when you say answer, it's an upper bound. So you don't mean it's an answer, it's an upper bound.
Yes, it's an upper bound. Yeah.
You don't have a lower bound.
Oh no, none at all. Absolutely
For
not.
this question.
Say again?
For this question, you don't have a lower bound.
No lower bound at all. The counting gives you nothing because there are, it gives you nothing. So I don't know. This is nothing to do with secret sharing. I mean, it's purely a sort of complexity question, and you know. And we asked sort of monotone function geeks in the theory community, and they don't seem to know any better. Good. So the rest of the talk, about half an hour, is sort of going towards a proof of this theorem, and this is a sequence of works. I'll probably get to the first 1/3 of the proof in the construction. Hopefully, that's again non-zero. Okay. So step one is to define this very, what I think is a very nice communication game called the conditional disclosure of secrets game. And that already, so I'll tell you how this connects to secret sharing. It gives you already secret sharing for a class of access structures. Not everything is class of access structures. And we'll show a CDS with communication to the square root n. In turn, it will translate to a secret sharing scheme with the same kind of communication. Really, the new technique, that's the one thing I want to sort of highlight here, is a connection to private information retrieval protocols, which again I'll define, and in terms of locally decodable codes. Again, if you can design better locally decodable codes, you get better sort of CDS schemes and therefore secret sharing. So that's step one. And this is really what I'm going to sort of talk about. I won't have time for much else. But just to give you a flavor of where we go from here, so two-party is not good enough, so we go to sort of multi-party CDS. Again, nothing changes in the communication complexity. We get the same communication complexity, but we sort of enlarge the set of access structures for which we can sort of do secret sharing. So the number of secret sharing, number of access structures we can handle there is something like 2 to the n choose 2. And here it's going to be like 2 to the n choose n over 2, essentially. So we'll keep sort of making progress in construction. And every time you need a sort of a new sort of technique, sometimes you can use, at least in the first step, you can use private information retrieval protocols as a black box. Later, you actually have to go into the head of these, into the construction itself, and modify the underlying mathematics, which turns out to be this thing called matching vector families. If you haven't heard about it, don't worry about it. And finally, sort of take that and put everything together. So I won't have time for all this stuff. Just step one. So let's get started. All right. So here's the game. Right. You have 3 parties. Right? Alice, and Bob, and Charlie, and they have sort of inputs x and y. You should think about x and y as n-bit strings, and a bit b should it's a bit b. Yeah. And this is sort of a number in the forehead type setting, right? Each party knows 2 of the 3 inputs, but not the third, right? I mean, that's the way it's set. And in addition, sort of Alice and Bob share a random string, which Charlie cannot see, right? So in cryptography, you always have to hide something from someone. And that random string is something that Alice and Bob know, but Charlie doesn't. So what is a game? Alice and Bob can send one message to Charlie, one and only one message. There's no talking back and forth. And at the end, Charlie has to figure out what this bit b is, precisely when some function f of x comma y is 1. Right? So there is an input, 2 n-bit input, x concatenated with y. Unfortunately, I don't have it. I am Alice. I don't have it. I only have half of it. Venkat doesn't have it. He only has the second half of it. Right? And we want to send one message to Vipul. Right? I mean, and he should be able to figure out this bit only if this f of x y is true. So it's a little bit of a bizarre game, certainly if you think about it from a communication complexity perspective, right? I mean, if you didn't care about, so there are really sort of 2 conditions sort of hiding in this one English sentence. One is that if f of x, y is 1, Charlie learns the bit b. This is correctness. And the second condition is if f of xy is 0, Charlie does not learn the bit B. That's privacy. So it's encoded in this one sentence. If you don't care about privacy, if you only care about sort of correctness, this is completely trivial. Just make sure we're on the same page. Can you say why? Just send B. Okay, correctness is obvious, and you didn't care about privacy in the first place. So yeah. So from a communication complexity point of view, this is a completely trivial question. And yet, if you have the if and only if, this becomes rather interesting. Okay. So this is the problem we'll actually
Wait a
consider.
minute, they both don't know x and y though. Alice and Bob, you're saying they should compute f of x, y?
Somehow, without talking to each other, right? That's the. So you mean the
Why is that
protocol?
trivial? Why is that trivial?
Ah, good. So here's the protocol. Alice sends the bit B to Charlie, right? Charlie computes f of x, y. He knows x and y together. And if f of x, y is 1, he outputs the bit B. Otherwise, he says, well, I wasn't supposed to output B, so I output nothing. Right?
I thought Charlie was the one who was supposed to learn.
Learn the
They
bit B.
conditionally know that.
Yes.
Who's the person who's, there's a fourth party?
No, there is only 3 parties, right? There's
You
only
said
3
he
parties.
conditionally,
You were saying, if
what does
you-
Charlie tell them? You said
He
Charlie
just
computes
outputs.
f of x, y.
Yeah.
And then,
And he either decides to output the bit B if f of x, y is 1, or bottom if it's not so. Okay, so let's
So
say.
probably learns is the funny thing. Probably output.
who is,
yeah.
Because
who's
by
the
learns,
fourth
he
party?
do B.
Who's the fourth party that Charlie's talking to?
There is no fourth party. He either outputs something or he doesn't.
So yeah, I think Gary is right. I think you should, if you want to say that, you should change the learns outputs. Because if you send B, then the game is over because you have violated the rules.
Violated the privacy condition. So let's say Charlie outputs the
Okay, so what's the privacy condition again?
privacy condition says the following, right? If f of x, y is good, the definition first. If f of x, y is 0, then Charlie's view, which is the 2 messages together, is independent of the bit B. That's the privacy.
Charlie doesn't know the bit B.
Doesn't know the bit B. If f of x, y happen to be 0.
Okay.
But the point is that neither Alice nor Bot can figure out if f of x, y is 0 or not by themselves. So, how do they decide whether to send the bit B up? Right?
I think the point is there is no easy.
There is no
yes,
easy
I
solution
think
to
that's-
this
I guess
question.
we should just wait for it.
Right?
So how about simple case where x predicate is true if x equals y?
Good. So this can be solved, right? Easily, again. Here's a solution. Let's say you have a universal independent hash function.
Sorry,
Right?
what was the question again?
What if the predicate, what if the function f is 1 if x equals y and 0 otherwise? Right? So the protocol is the following. Think of R, the shared randomness, as a hash function, as a x plus b, right? Hash y, that's what Alice does. Hash x XORed with b, is what Bob does, right? So if x were equal to y, the XOR of the 2 messages is in fact b, right? One of the messages was h of y, the other one was h of x XOR b. X equals y, so XOR is equal to b. Otherwise, they're independent. H of x and h of y are random and independent, so you get okay. So equality is easy. Fortunately, that's pretty much the only thing that's easy.
But in that example, doesn't Charlie know x and y, so Charlie can figure out b regardless?
No, he cannot. He doesn't know h. He doesn't know the hash function. Right. So that's really. I mean, the universal sort of hash function guarantee is that if I hide the hash function from you, no matter what x and y you pick, h of x and h of y will come.
And the next function is supposed to prove if they're not equal.
Say again. Okay.
I mean, it might as well just
That's
keep
a hard
going.
question. That's hard. Yes.
So I just had another question. Why did this guy study this problem?
Why did these guys study this problem? You know, it's a great question. They started studying a harder question, which is related to secure computation, secure multiparty computation. They couldn't solve it, so they said, well, let's, I'm just half kidding, right? So it turns out that this is related to a cryptographic object called attribute-based encryption. That's sort of another motivation for it, which is a natural object, although I'm not going to define it. As with cryptographic definitions, it takes at least a minute. Yeah. So not equals. It's a great question. All right. Okay. So I claim sort of CDS gives you a secret sharing scheme for a class of access structures. I don't really want to go into too much detail here. The class of access structures, let me just tell you what the class of access structures is. It's defined by a graph. Right? So an access structure is defined by a bipartite graph. And it says that if any one person tries to sort of reconstruct a secret, they can't. If any two people try to reconstruct a secret, well, they can or cannot, depending on whether they're connected by an edge or not. Any three people can always reconstruct. Okay, so this is actually a slice function. So for that class of two slice functions, CDS already gives you secret sharing scheme. Any two slice function. Okay, so and the rest of it is a proof of it. Well, you probably already sort of it, right? The shares are sort of possible messages. The ith person here, you should think about it as so the ith input to Alice. Compute all possible sort of Alice messages. Give them as shares to these pink people, purple people. Compute all possible Bob messages. Give them as shares to these green people. And now it's basically a syntactic check.
So it's important the graph is bipartite?
It is important the graph is bipartite because really all we are sort of doing here are sort of sets of size 2. If you wanted to do hypergraphs, you would have to consider CDS with many parties. So 3 parties.
But even inside the graph itself is bipartite. So you're not.
Oh, the graph is I see, that's what you're saying. Okay, good. No, it's not important. I mean, this is just kind of ease of thinking. You can do bipartite covers of arbitrary graphs and you can, with very little loss. Okay, so in any case, this guy is connected to sort of secret sharing in a very sort of nice way. So what we will do for the rest of the time is sort of, in the hope of building sort of secret sharing schemes, we'll study CDS for a particular function, which is the index function. So in some sense, it's actually the complete function, right? The index function is the following. Alice input is a humongous input, right? Think about it as a database or a truth table, right? 2 to the little n sized truth table. Bob's input is an index, a little n sized index. Right, and the function says, well, is the xth bit of the database 1 or not? That's what the function computes. That's the index function. Right? Very, very simple function. So the inputs are sort of lopsided, but good. So this is the CDS for this class of functions is what we will study.
So if the bit is 1, then Charlie is supposed to learn B and otherwise 1.
Correct. If d of x is 1, then Charlie learns B, otherwise learns in the sense of, look at all the information Charlie has. Either it's, I can pull out the bit B from there, or the information is independent. Good. Again, it has a large gap in the known sort of upper and lower bounds before. Usually n over 2 was the upper bound, and omega n was the lower bound.
So my example where f is a not equal function, that's outside the class that you did here, right? Because it's a complete graph, bipartite graph, or close. Because it's too many edges in the graph.
Let me think about it. No, it's actually not. So it fits into the index function framework, right? I mean, because you could think about sort of the, so Bob has x, Alice has y, right? But of course, I can take y and create a truth table of the not equals y function. right? I mean, this can, yeah, so this makes sense. Indeed, that would give you a better sort of secret sharing scheme for the not equals function. But let me say one more thing. It'll give you a better secret sharing for the not equals function only as a consequence of the fact that you get better secret sharing scheme for all functions. So it says nothing specific about the not equals function. So it's a little bit unsatisfying. All right, so let's warm up, okay? And I guess we are going to do warm up for like 5 minutes, maybe the protocol for 5 minutes. All right, so warm up. How would you possibly do this? So in fact, I give you lots of communication. Let's say 2 to the n bits of communication for one of the parties. Yeah? How would you possibly? It's kind of just so. I mean, a priori, it's not even clear that there is a solution, right? Because these guys have separate inputs. Who computes f of x1? Here is a solution. Okay, this is an algebraic solution. So here's what I do. Bob takes the bit b, right, multiplies it by the unit vector. So ex is the unit vector, which is 1 in the x location. So now it's going to be b in the x location, right? So that's it. And one time adds it with r, basically adds r to this. So if you just look at Bob's message, it does not have any information about b. It's added to a random r, which Charlie doesn't know. What does Alice send? Alice sends the inner product of the database, which is a vector, with this vector r. So that's what Alice sends. I claim this is good enough to solve our problem. Why is that the case? Well, Charlie computes, looks at this guy, he knows the database, he computes d in a product r plus whatever, this vector that he gets from Alice, from Bob, and XORs it with whatever he gets from Alice, which is just a single bit. Yeah? So algebra tells you that this is, in fact, d in a product with b times the unit vector x. D in a product unit vector x is d of x, so it's b times d of x. If d of x is 1, voila, you get b. If d of x is 0, certainly this computation give you nothing. Right? So I have to argue that from the view of Charlie, it's independent of the bit b. I haven't argued that yet, but at least this process gives you nothing. Yes.
So, can we solve this problem using Gabel circuits just for NC1?
Well, you can, except an arbitrary function f, an arbitrary truth table f. If you write down a sort of a NC1 formula, NC1 circuit or formula, it's going to have size 2 to the n. So you are going to run into this. So right now I'm only giving you a 2 to the n solution, so I guess that's another way to do it. But this is a nice and clean and like elementary way of doing it. Right? Totally elementary. So correctness, I argued. This is the equation. Just need to check. How do you argue privacy? So privacy means that when d of x is 0, if you look at everything that Charlie gets, which is just these 2 messages, they are completely independent of the bit b. So why is that the case? Well, let's argue that the marginal of the first of this message is independent. Well, that's true because you added a random r to it. And d in a product r is something you can compute using d and this message only without knowing anything about d. That again follows from the functional equation. So the argument is that everything that Charlie sees can be simulated, can be generated without knowing b. That tells you what's right. So it's super simple protocol, right? Unfortunately, it has a pretty bad communication complexity. Like Bob sends sort of capital and 2 to the little n bits. Alice only sends 1 bit. You can come up with a dual protocol where things look the other way around. Again, it's an exercise. And you can balance it. You can get square root n and square root n. Again, an exercise. This is the best we 2 to the little n over 2 is the best. In fact, these protocols all have a very, very nice structure. So they have what I call linear reconstruction, which means that the function that Charlie computes is the function that Charlie computes on the 2 messages to get the bit is a linear function, which it is, right? This is the function. Yeah. So this is a linear reconstruction protocol. In fact, we have a lower bound for linear reconstruction protocols that say, well, this is actually the best you can do. The product of the communication complexities of Alice and Bob messages has to be omega n. So, in fact, we did achieve it in 3 different ways. One I told you about, and 2 I didn't. Yeah, so this is the best you can do, unfortunately, if you stick with sort of linear reconstruction protocols. Good. So we do better. Instead of 2 to the n over 2, we get 2 to the square root n. And it suggests that you have to break out of this sort of linearity sort of bubble to do any better. Lower bound suggests that you should do that.
Is this the balanced scenario you talked about a second ago?
What do you mean?
Well, you had a square root of n. Is that where that root n comes from there? Or is that...
No, it doesn't. It doesn't. So, good. So this protocol itself has 3 variants. One where you, one where you have 1 and 2 to the c root n. You 2 to the c root n and 1, and then you can balance, but it only affects the constant in the exponent, which is, since I'm putting O tilde in there, it doesn't take.
So are there any known lower bounds on the?
Nothing. Absolutely nothing. Because lower bound is n, maybe n log n. Exact. Okay, so our sort of key observation is that you can this relates to another thing that people have studied a great deal in crypto and complexity theory, which is a notion of private information retrieval. So, how time do I have? 5 minutes. Right. All right. So here's a private information retrieval scenario. Again, it looks from a 50,000 feet. It looks similar. There are 3 parties, right? They all have inputs, and they all want to. So one party actually wants to get something, but the details are extremely So here, this setting, Alice and Bob, they both have the same truth table, database truth table. Charlie has an index x, and he wants to retrieve d of x. So that's the goal. And he wants to hide x from both these databases. So the way this works is, I want Charlie to look at his index x, send a message to each of the 2 servers. They compute something depending on their database, send it back, and from that, Charlie should be able to learn d of x. In the whole process, neither of the 2 servers learns anything about x. So of course, you say, an obvious way to do this is one of the servers actually sends the entire database to Charlie. Yes, they didn't learn anything because they didn't get anything from Charlie. But that has communication complexity capital N, not so good. So the whole point here is to reduce the communication complexity beyond. Again, there is considerable work on this problem. The best known solution has communication complexity to the square root. Okay, why? It's a completely different talk, maybe Zeb's talk. Okay, so let me tell you in one slide how to go from private information retrieval to CDS to solve this problem. We'll do this by just manipulating pictures. Okay, so let's go. Let's start from the private information retrieval scenario, right? So there's one party who has an input, and these 2 servers that have the same database, and they send it. Okay, first step, let me split Charlie into 2 Charlies. A Charlie that asks questions and a Charlie that gets answers and reconstructs. Okay, and these two Charlies share a state, obviously, but so be it. So I didn't do anything. Okay. Okay. So now let me look at the two questions that Charlie asks the two servers, right? So we know that neither one of the two questions should reveal anything about data. So that's the private information retrieval guarantee. Each one should be, well, let's say between friends, uniformly random. Okay, each one should be uniformly random, but put together, of course, they reveal X. Okay, so let's say X maps to some information, some vector Ux and Wx, and Q0 and Q1 is a secret sharing of this information Ux, let's say. So some information about X, some information that uniquely determines X. Okay, so it's not without loss of generality. There's a little bit of loss of generality, but all sort of peer schemes have this property that if you look at the first two messages, either one looks uniformly random, and they have an additive secret sharing of some vector use of X that determines X. Let's say. Right, so far so good, right? Now my goal is to move, in small steps and go towards the kind of make this picture look like a CDS picture. Okay, so how do I do it? Let's see. So let's look at the answers that the server sent back to the client, right? So there's some function of the questions they get from the client. So this guy gets R from the client. He computes some function. I just call it H sub D. I mean, it doesn't matter what it is. Some function he computes depending on the database and this function. Again, this is some function that depends on the database and the other question. Yeah. So this is without loss of generality. And now comes the important property which we require from the PIR protocol, which is linearity. So what I want is that Charlie, when he sort of tries to combine these two messages to get the answer, he should actually be computing a linear function of these two messages. So it computes. Any linear function can be written in this form. The difference between these two in a product with some sort of information about the index. Right? I mean, you have to trust me on this. So as long as the reconstruction is linear, we can always write it this way. Okay, so this is a property. This is again a non-generic property of a PIR scheme, and again, all PIR schemes satisfy this. We'll call this the linear client PIR. Now I claim we are done. Why? Well, one of the two questions that Charlie sends to the servers is truly random. How does it matter if he comes up with this question or the question lives in a shared random string somehow? Right? It doesn't matter. I mean, I could read off, yeah, it's just uniformly random. So somehow put it in the sort of it's supposed to be a band here, which has the random string. Then we call one of these two servers Bob. Okay, so the guy has a database and he computes some function on this database and the shared random string, sends it to Charlie. Then we call the person with the input X, Alice. She also has a shared random string. She has the input X. She computes a message and sends it out. Okay, that's the second message. Okay, so we have, syntactically, we have Alice, we have Bob. The only one missing is Charlie, and the numbers actually don't seem to be working out together. Okay, right? We need one Charlie, and we have like two guys sitting here. Okay. If we need one Charlie that gets both these messages, and here there are two guys getting two things. What do? We do the obvious thing, in some sense, for that. Another thing that doesn't match is that the CDS setting, Alice and Bob, at least Alice, actually has a bit P. This is the only thing that she's trying to hide, right? And it doesn't appear in the view. And how do we sort of handle this? We say, well, look, I mean, what is the function that Alice is trying to compute with X and B? She either computes R plus Ux if B is 1, or she just sends R, which is identical to what, the random string that she gets. Okay, and the following beautiful equation holds. If b is 0, then the two things on the left and right of the minus sign are the same, right? So this is, in fact, identically true. Otherwise, it is the same equation that we wrote down. And now we, merge the two. You go from 4 to 3. We merge the two parties into one. And what does this party compute? Well, this is actually our Charlie in the CDS. He actually gets two messages, one from the two guys, and he computes that equation. And by definition, that equation reveals b times d sub x, which is precisely what you want. If d sub x is 1, you get b. If it's 0, you get nothing. You get 0. A little bit fast, but really, so the bottom line is that you can go from any locally decodable code, therefore private information retrieval scheme that satisfies this linearity property, into a CDS scheme. And what I didn't tell you is you can go from here to any secret sharing scheme. So, out of time. So, there's a question of how do you get these peer schemes? It's a fascinating fascinating set of mathematics, all on its own. You need to use things called odd polynomials, back from the work of Barrington, Weigel, and Brodish. So work from it all the way, you basically get a peer scheme, principle of work, and that is what gives us. So there's a square root n. There's a 2 to the square root n, and the 2 to the square root n actually comes from the construction of odd polynomials. All right, so from this you can go further and further and further. Instead of graphs, you can look at hypergraphs, and that that gives you a much larger class of access structures. In fact, 2 to the n over 2 of them. The question is, what corresponds to hypergraph secret sharing compared to CDS? Turns out it's a multi-party version of CDS. Again, there's a setting where one of the parties has a database, and the index is split among 10 parties. So each party gets one bit. In a setting where the input is even more distributed across the parties. So therefore, harder problem to solve. Again, it turns out that you can solve it with no loss in communication complexity. So that's the bottom line is that one sentence. Then there is even more. So how do you go from? So it turns out that you can go from this hypergraph secret sharing to slice functions, which are what I defined before. Again, no loss in communication complexity, 2 to the square root n still. And that increases even more from 2 to the n over 2 to 2 to the n choose n over 2, which is more than 2 to the n over 2. And finally, you go to general secret sharing, really all functions. That's where you lose 2 to the square root n to blame the monotone Boolean formula geeks for not solving the problem. Rather, they should solve this problem. This is a good reason. Okay, so good. So this is a sharing scheme. And response to Venkat's question, this actually gives us a new result in computational complexity. It gives us a monotone span program for any Boolean function, monotone Boolean function, with this size, which has nothing to do with that cryptography. Okay, so let me zoom out even more. Really, there's tons of things in information-theoretic cryptography, all of the flavor of secure computation, secure multiparty computation. Private simultaneous messages is a word that I didn't mention in response to a question from there, right? Which led to the study of conditional disclosure of secrets, PIR, so on and so forth. There are all sorts of relations between these primitives. In particular, PIR seems to actually be the bottleneck of achieving better schemes in all these worlds. Like if you can construct a better locally decodable code, you can make progress on all these problems. Yeah, that's what we do. Sorry for going off.
When you make use of more server of PAR, those are
That's a good question. I don't know. So CDS and PAR have this following thing, right? So 5-party CDS is harder to construct than 2-party CDS. 5-server PAR is easier to construct than 2-server. So in some sense, it's easier because the database is replicated more in PAR. CDS is harder because the same input is kind of split into smaller bits. So I don't know how to use even 3-server PAR to do better. Yeah, it's a good question.